Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for the chair to join us. Earsa Weatherspoon.
Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello. Hi, Janet. Hello. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Marissa. Thank you.
Gonna just wait a couple more minutes, everyone, before we start. Amy, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Hi. And who's with you today, Amy?
So joining me today is Ben Huff from the Transportation Division at DCP. Jesse Hirakawa is also going to be joining us. He is an urban designer in the Brooklyn office. And then we're also joined tonight by a couple of our colleagues from DOT. So Dash, who was presenting last time as well. And I think Lee is also joining us.
Okay, great. Well, my name is Earsa Weatherspoon. I am the chair of Community Board 8 as well as SLAC. So I thank you all for being here. Thank you, presenters. We're looking forward to getting started and welcome. So Amy, you want to start?
I'm not sure I see Dash in the meeting yet. So maybe we can
Okay.
give him a couple more minutes. Sorry,
He just joined it.
he's got,
He just
there
joined
he
it.
is. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Hey, Dash. Okay. I'm going to share my screen.
Okay. I do want to ask you, Amy,
Mhm.
as you're sharing your screen, did you have an opportunity to look at the questions that were
Oh,
sent to you?
yes. Yes. Thank you so
Awesome.
much for sharing those questions ahead of time. We will do our best to address them either within the presentation or after the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank
We
you.
really appreciated them.
Great.
Okay, so we can get started. So, as I mentioned earlier, my name is Amy Jin. I am a planner in the Brooklyn office at the Department of City Planning. I'm joined tonight by Ben Huff and Jesse Hirakawa from DCP, as well as Dash Henley from DOT. And I think I'm not sure if Lee is here too, but he might be here. And so I'll
Okay.
hand it over to Dash for the first part of this presentation.
Okay, thank you. Dash, before you start, I just want to just let everyone know, just to keep decency and order, that if you could just not put it in the chat, but raise your hand so I'll be able to see it more readily. And we want to allow them to have their presentation and then do the questioning. Thank you. Please proceed, Dash.
Gotcha. Thanks, Ursa.
Thank
Okay,
you.
1 second. Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure my video is okay. So thanks again for the introduction. Same as saying, my name is Dash Henling. I'm a planner in Brooklyn Borough Commissioner's Office at DOT. And this presentation is going to be on the Open Restaurants Program. The idea of this program is to give restaurants the option of sidewalk and roadway seating for outdoor dining. This is, obviously everybody knows, has been a temporary program. But this is the presentation on how we're working on turning it into a permanent program that balances many needs of the street and the sidewalk, as well as keeping restaurants and other users in mind. So the program is going to take what's worked in the temporary version, both pre-COVID and the emergency version, when developing the permanent future guidelines. I just want to make it clear, same as last time, that while this presentation covers both sidewalk and roadway dining, what DOT and city planning are asking the board for is the opinion on the specific sidewalk cafe text amendment, because what we are talking about in terms of the open restaurant roadway dining component is not fully fleshed out yet. So this is very much a preview. Next slide, please. And I think I covered everything in this one. Okay, yeah, let's go one more. Thank you. Okay, so as we all know, the city had street cafes before COVID, but there were far fewer of them. The majority of the programs were administered by what used to be called the Department of Consumer Affairs and what's now called the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. DOT did run one small pilot of public roadway seating, which we called street seats, which you can see in the right-hand corner. But there were only 25 setups. Most of them were in Manhattan. I don't think there were any in CB8. I think the closest one was in Park Slope. And our understanding is that the relatively low participation in that program was due in large part to the associated costs and difficult process of getting it set up. Next, please. So as a result of COVID, we created the Open Restaurants Program on a temporary basis. So the city suspended existing rules through an emergency executive order, and the Department of Transportation was charged with creating a fast and simple way for restaurants to conduct their business in the public right of way. And since the launch, which was just over a year ago, over 11,000 restaurants have participated. And it's estimated that has helped save 100,000 jobs that could have been lost. So I know one of the questions was on that number, and where that number comes from is the number of restaurant jobs that were lost at the beginning of COVID, and then the number of people who were rehired after this program was instituted by restaurants. And by many accounts, the program has not just been a lifesaver for those employees and those restaurants, that industry, but also the city as a whole, as it's seen that the possibilities of outdoor dining and the incredible vitality that it can bring to street life in the city. And it's been a real beacon of hope to a lot of people in the city to be able to safely enjoy outdoor dining during the pandemic. Next slide, please. And of course, with that success and that hope, we've seen some challenges over the past year. We've learned both positive and negative lessons from this temporary program, and we're using those to inform the permanent one. So on the positive side, we think that the robust use of the emergency program was helped by three things. First, unlike the pre-emergency sidewalk cafe program, no geographies were off limits. So any restaurant with ground floor frontage and sidewalk or roadway space that met the siting criteria could participate. Second, the program was free and easy to access, unlike the pre-COVID sidewalk cafe program, and which required multiple months of review by multiple agencies. And third, the new added element of roadway dining gave restaurants brand new options to create seating and otherwise use spaces, particularly those that might not have enough room on the sidewalk to accommodate a cafe, or that had very small interior spaces that couldn't be used because of the pandemic, or people didn't feel comfortable indoors even when it was reopened inside. And we also learned some new challenges. The speed with which we needed to roll out this program on the temporary emergency basis meant that it was built from scratch, and that created some confusion. So we as an agency have learned a lot more about operating a program like this, and restaurants have learned a lot and learned a lot from each other in that process, and the guidance for the program has therefore changed. Throughout the program as well, specifically roadway seating and the interaction of the roadway, we've heard from other agencies, such as the fire department, that there were considerations that we needed to keep in mind with those guidelines. So elements like street signage, making sure there was viewpoints and that sort of thing for fire trucks and for pedestrian safety. And safety is our top concern in this program. So we've been working with our agencies to make sure that the permanent program keeps that in mind. Third, enforcement has been pretty complicated on both sides. On the one hand, we have restaurants who are already dealing with a lot because of COVID, and they can sometimes feel squeezed or over-inspected. And so we know that they want understandable, reliable rules that they can have and fit in order to stay a part of the program. And then we have other enforcement issues where we really need to make sure that these establishments are following the program and that we have an enforcement apparatus in place to make sure that they do. Next slide, please. So all of that being said, those successes and failures, we believe that the program has been a massive success overall. And the mayor has charged us with developing permanent successor to the emergency program as part of legislation that was passed by the city council late last year. In order to do that, we need to change a number of different laws and regulations that control outdoor dining in non-emergency situations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're proposing for the permanent program to get us there. And then I'll come back later to the legal changes needed to effectuate it. Next slide, please. Okay, so to start with some overall elements, we anticipate that as in the emergency, DOT will administer the permanent option for both sidewalk seating and roadway seating with similar rules to current sidewalk cafes, but that the program will be available citywide. So this is a change from it being consumer and worker protection, as well as having complicated rules on geographic restrictions. Next slide, please. And when the program is final, the specific design guidelines will be very clear and will revolve around these principles that balance the use of sidewalk space by a restaurant, but maximize the experience and openness and activation to the general public. So all of these rules that you see here will apply in terms of ground floor space access, clearance to the curb to make sure that people can walk or use wheelchairs or strollers and get by. And trying to think what else on here that needs to get called out. Only in restaurants frontage. So this is something else that came up. Currently, there's a little bit of leeway with that in getting the permission of a neighboring property owner in order to do that. We don't anticipate that that will be part of the permit program. Let's see, next slide, please. Okay, so for most of the city, the old 8-foot rule will hold in terms of having 8 feet of clearance between where the seats are and the curb. But we're exploring other options in special cases. There will be considerations for areas that have a lot of pedestrian traffic, and on the flip side, possibly waivers for those that can't meet this requirement. But we're still anticipating all of these components that I discussed previously, visual connections for drivers and pedestrians so everyone can see safely, sturdy barriers on the edges, having it open to the sidewalk, having removable tables and chairs. That was another question that came up in the list. So we would have the requirements is that the establishments have to have those removable tables and chairs so they can take them out at the end of the night. Next, please. Okay. So with this, what we've seen is that there have been a lot of difficulties with having the program all year round. So we envision that this permanent program will be seasonal, won't run in the winter. However, we will not make changes to the current rules, which allow for winter, until after the 2022 winter season. So in other words, the way it operates now, which is year round, will not be changing anytime soon. When the permanent program comes in, that is when we will operate it seasonally, so not to include winter. So we're looking at options where we can have a hardship waiver for restaurants that put in installations but can't remove their setups. And we're looking at helping out restaurants with clear design guidelines in order to create structures that can be installed and then moved out and then brought back once the winter season is over. Next slide, please. So in looking at both moving the legal authority to run the program to DOT and in creating the new processes for the roadway setups, we're looking to streamline the review process as much as possible, while leaving in place the essential roles of agency and public review. So that involves all of these fun little legal changes. And that would also include creating a 4-year license window for the establishments with periodic compliance checks and the ability to find or remove bad actors. And I know this was a question that came up in the questions as well. So while there would be a 4-year license, there would also be annual reviews. And of course, in between those times, would be open to complaints to 311, to DOT, if there are bad actors, and enforcement would be based on that as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so in order to make this permanent program a reality, we have these 3 steps that we need to advance. First, which is the focus of today, is the removal of the locational prohibitions through zoning. So it's really key to unlocking the full citywide universe of applying this program and consolidating control and accountability for the program under one agency to streamline everything. So we're also working with the City Council to enact appropriate legislation which will update the laws governing sidewalk cafes and then create a new set of laws and rules to govern roadwalk cafes. So that would be steps 2 and 3 after that. Next, please. And following zoning and those legal changes, we anticipate that the rulemaking that formalizes many of that program's design and application details and all of that would take place. And then a formal opening up of the application window for the new permanent program would start in late 2022 for implementation in 2023. So we wanted to lay out this timeline to let restaurants and communities know that you should feel some certainty with how the program is now, and that this is the process for creating the new permanent program, but that it's not going to come just yet. Let's see. And I think that might be it for this slide. Let's see. I just wanted to add that changing the zoning is really the first critical step, the text amendment that we're talking about today to making the program permanent. But all of those steps need to happen as well after that. And each of those steps invites public input, for example, tonight, of course, and the questions we've already received. So we really think that the epidemic has really reshaped the way that New Yorkers think about how our streets can be used, which has been a silver lining in the otherwise awful time. And we think that this successful temporary program can be an even more successful permanent program. And so we're really welcoming feedback on that tonight and going forward. We have a website for feedback as well that we can share in the chat that's going to be open for a good long while. So for those who don't want to give feedback tonight or prefer to write or want to do it at a later date or send it around, you'll have that option as well. And once again, just wanted to reiterate that the roadway portion of this presentation is very much preliminary, and that the primary purpose, again, on the text amendment that city planning is talking about would be specifically related to sidewalk cafes. So with that in mind, I will hand it back to Amy. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, so hi everyone again. For those who missed my intro earlier, my name is Amy. I'm a planner in the Brooklyn office at the Department of City Planning. I'm very pleased to present today on the zoning text amendment, which, as Dash discussed, is one element of facilitating a permanent open restaurants program. So as previously discussed, there are three main legal processes to create a permanent open restaurants program. The first, which is the focus for the rest of the presentation, is the removal of locational prohibitions by a text amendment. Unnecessary zoning restrictions stand in the way of thousands of restaurants from participating in outdoor dining past the emergency. The zoning proposal is key to unlocking the full citywide universe of applicability and consolidating control and accountability for the program under a single agency, the Department of Transportation. Under the zoning rules, which are currently suspended, zoning dictates three different kinds of cafes and where in the city they can be located. Most commonly, unenclosed cafes, which allows for readily movable tables, chairs, and fencing with no allowable overhead coverage other than umbrellas or retractable roofs. A small sidewalk cafe is an unenclosed sidewalk cafe containing no more than a single row of tables and chairs adjacent to the street line and can extend no further than 4.5 feet from the building. Or an enclosed cafe, which is defined as extensions of the building into the sidewalk using light building materials. Zoning held the geographic restrictions of where these cafe types were allowed. The public could view these cafes the public could view where these cafes were allowed on DCP's zoning and land use map, which I demoed a couple of weeks ago with some of you. It's short, the short name is Zola. Yellow areas here on the map allow only small cafe types. Purple are areas where only unenclosed and small cafes are allowed, and green is where all cafe types were allowed. Importantly, you can see a lot of areas where cafes weren't allowed at all, even if the sidewalks were wide and conditions otherwise would have allowed it. Red are areas that specifically prohibited having cafes, and blue is all the residential areas of the city. So to date, over 11,500 restaurants are participating in the Open Restaurants program. In particular, the city saw a huge surge of outdoor dining occur in the outer boroughs. 10,000 of those restaurants used the sidewalk for their outdoor dining setup. During the emergency program, 2,500 restaurants were permitted in areas that would have been prohibited or limited under existing zoning. But the proposed text amendment would allow them to continue to have their sidewalk cafes. Looking at the map on the right, in red are the areas, in red are restaurants in specific areas that were prohibited by zoning. These include commercial mid-blocks, certain special districts, under elevated rail lines, other named congested areas. In blue are all of the grandfather restaurants in residential areas. Zoning doesn't allow restaurants in residential areas, but many of these uses predate zoning and so have remained. We estimate that there are about 2,900 citywide and 1,000 participating in the Open Restaurants program. And yellow are cafes in zones that would have limited to the small typology only. There are many reasons why these areas are prohibited, but what we've seen is that cafes can work in many locations than zoning contemplated. Just look at this, okay. So on this map here, all of the blue areas, similar to the previous maps, are residential areas where new cafes would not have been allowed. The green areas are where all cafes would be allowed. I don't really see any yellow here, but the red areas are where they're specifically prohibited. So you can see a stretch of that along Atlantic, and there are some other spots here and there. So here we see all of the pre-COVID sidewalk cafes as of 2019 in the district. There was a total of 16, all of which were unenclosed, primarily in the western part of the district. You can see the purple little dots there. And so here is a map of the open restaurants in the district since the emergency open restaurant program. Here we see that there are 60 open restaurants on the sidewalks, 19 in the roadways, and 101 in both roadways and sidewalks. We can also see that there is one restaurant in an area that was explicitly prohibited along Atlantic by Troy Avenue. Similarly, there are 18 restaurants in residential or no cafe zoning areas, and those are the blue dots on the map, which are scattered across the district. In many cases, we know restaurants wanted to have sidewalk cafes in these areas and would request zoning overlays to legalize them. This proposal would eliminate that burden. This proposal will not allow new restaurants from occurring in these areas as of right, but it will allow restaurants that exist in these areas to apply for a sidewalk cafe. Other cleanup actions in the text amendment include removing definitions and cross-references to cafes, removing text that precludes operable windows that service outdoor restaurants, ensuring that no enclosure provisions require a restaurant to be fully indoors as a condition of its zoning district, and clarifying sidewalk widening text to ensure it doesn't conflict with the operation of the Open Restaurants program. To summarize all of this, we're at the start of a multi-pronged legislative process. The text that is being referred has been referred to 59 community boards and 5 borough presidents for 90 days. We expect the text amendment to come back to the CPC soon this fall. We anticipate city council actions to be underway during the same period, continuing the process of updating the sidewalk cafe and fully fleshing out the roadway cafe authority through a rulemaking process. Also underway during the summer and informed in part by the community board consultations will be a design review process. We do not expect full program launch until late 2022 or early 2023 at the earliest, which gives a lot of time for restaurants to transition to the permanent program should they choose to do so. So that concludes my presentation today for the Open Restaurants program and the zoning proposal. My colleagues and I are happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation, Amy and Dash. Um, how are we going to handle the questions that were sent previously? So, because you have a host of questions that were sent prior to today. So, how's the plan in handling those?
Depends how you want to. So what I did was I went through all of them and sort of grouped the categories for each. So I could just I can go
Okay.
through that list of categories. Some of them we answered in the presentations. So I just added a little bit to slides for that. So some of that was centered around citing rules and enforcement and that sort of thing, and license times. So those were already answered, but I can go through the topics for each of those. I don't know if that sounds good to you,
Yeah,
Amy.
that's good. You put it in some sort of organization. That's good. Does that work for you, Amy? Great. Thank you,
Yep,
Dash.
definitely.
Okay, cool. So let me just pull up. I both printed and on screen. So I'm trying to figure out. So I know one of the questions was based on insurance and asking about requirements for those. So I know in terms of that, at least right now, the city does recommend that private businesses consult their individual insurance brokers to make sure that they have appropriate coverage for these additional seating areas. I'm not sure how much that'll be changing in the permanent program, but that is the case for right now. And in terms of parking and using this space for restaurants versus parking or other uses, uh, like I was saying in my presentation, we believe that the program has been enormously successful, not just for people, not just for the restaurant industry and people who work for the restaurant industry, but communities in terms of having this space to enjoy dining and making good use of that space. We understand that the curb has many competing uses. So this is one of them, parking is one of them, driving, biking, all of that. And we believe that this use has been beneficial. So we're looking to continue that going forward. And we don't have any plans for residential parking or anything like that that was suggested in some of the questions for in response to this program. Another thing that came up a lot was rodents. It's very understandable.
Mhm.
You know, that's been an unfortunate issue for the history of New York and the history of any city. You know, it's been a problem well before this program, and it's remains with this program as well. So what we do for that is a few different things. The Department of Health has a guide on the open restaurants website that's given to restaurants for how to reduce rodents and other pests with outdoor dining. So that includes different kinds of cleaning protocols, guidance on garbage storage and disposal. I know there's a question specifically on trash bags. So they, really encourage places as much as possible to only put trash on the curb as close as possible to pickup times, which I know is not always easy. And there's information on baiting for rats and other pests as well. In addition to that, I know the Department of Health offers their regular rat academy trainings for free, which is useful for restaurants. It's also open to everyone, general public, and renters and homeowners and that sort of thing. So it's useful for that as well. I'm trying to see.
Dash, I can also add to that.
Sure.
Hello, this is Ben Huff from the Department of City Planning. I've been working on the Open Restaurants program. We're working with the Department of Health and Sanitation on this. The rat issue has come up a lot. So the Department of Health, as part of their letter grade inspections that they give to restaurants, they're going to be including the outdoor dining portion of that in their inspections. So they'll be able to see restaurants that are not keeping the outdoor dining areas, both the sidewalk and the roadway cafes, clean. And we're working with the Department of Sanitation on sort of the, expected increase of potential trash and how best to work operations, the roadway cafes, the trash placement with their regular pickup. So we're working on that.
Thanks, Ben. And I'm just continuing on the list. In terms of hours of operation, what we're proposing is that the closing for outdoor seating would follow the same times as current Department of Consumer and Worker Protection sidewalk program, as well as we already require restaurants to have those removable tables and chairs and to secure them when they're not in use. So in terms of issues associated with those hours, people were concerned about noise and safety. We're not proposing any changes to allow more noise or less safety. So those complaints would continue to be 311, and depending on how urgent or the emergency is, to be police enforcement as well. And I think
Dash, I'm sorry, let me just ask you about what you just said. So in the presentation that we received, I believe it was 12 midnight for Friday, and was it Saturday and Sunday 1 a.m. in concordance with DCWP?
I'm not sure if that's the case. I think yeah, Ben, you want to take this?
Yeah, it's Sunday right now. So for Sidewalk Cafe operating hours, Sunday to Thursday, it's midnight, and Friday and Saturday it can go till 1 a.m. So basically the rules will carry forward. They're not being changed. So that's how the Sidewalk Cafe permit existed before. And we expect that restaurants and the roadway cafe hours will be the same. I would say that all of the restaurants are expected to adhere to the noise code and will not be allowed to have amplified noise at all. And I think it will most likely make sense for restaurants to actually stop outdoor dining even prior to those hours and move dining indoors, especially if they have less customers. It makes sense operationally for them to consolidate, and I'd imagine they'd focus on the indoor space, or they're less likely to not be able to meet the noise code.
Thank you, Ben.
And I'm just going through the list. I think that covers most of them. I'm trying to see. Let me just do one more quick scan through.
So while you're scanning, Dash, another question kind of came to mind here in terms of the hours. So that would be an opportunity for boards to reduce their hours there in terms of when they come before us and with SLA. Is that correct enough?
Correct.
The
The sidewalk cafes will come before the board as they did prior to COVID. That is mandated by the city charter. And so that review will still be possible, and community boards will be able to give feedback as part of the liquor license.
Okay. Thank you. Dash, were you finished?
There was one more question that I saw about abandoned or unused structures, and I know that's been a concern. I think a couple of people wrote about that. So right now, and I don't anticipate this changing with the permanent program, all the roadway seating has to be used and occupied within 30 days of the authorization of it. So if it's not used or occupied for any 30-day period, then it's deemed abandoned and the restaurant must have it removed. And if the restaurant doesn't remove it, then the city will remove it. And then one last question was in terms of enforcement. So the permanent program includes ramping up hiring for managing this program and enforcing complaints and issues with it as well.
And I
Okay,
think with one thing on the enforcement, if I might just add, so DOT will get an application for an outdoor dining for roadway sidewalk. That will be reviewed, that will come to the board. And then once it's approved, the restaurant will build it out. DOT will make sure that that structure is in compliance with the rules of the permanent program. During the emergency program, we've had a self-certify program, and restaurants just were able to go ahead and build it. I would say in the permanent program, it'll be a much different process where DOT will be inspecting the structures. As far as noise or restaurants kind of operating outside their hours or not maintaining the clear path, well, I definitely with noise and other things that potentially late at night, NYPD would be notified and would be the first to respond, as they do currently now and did in the pre-existing program. And then the other complaints, those were, those will come to DOT, who will be able to send their inspectors out to make sure that they're meeting the appropriate guidelines.
okay. I just wanted to get back to the hours again. What about establishments that don't have liquor licenses? Because with the liquor license, you're able to at least have a guideline and some kind of restriction. For those restaurants that are not seeking license, how does that affect them? Or does it?
It's a good question. I believe they would be able to operate with the hours that are laid out through the sidewalk and roadway cafe program. And they'll still be, subject to the noise code, and they will have a ban on amplified noise.
Great. Now, Dash, I just want to ask you, so you finished the questioning or the answering of the questions that were received prior?
I think I got
Are
to
you-
most everything.
Okay, so
But I
I'll
know
just
that
give you
you had
time
other
to really
questions in
look.
the chat, right?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to, there are quite a few, but reasonable, I believe. So if we can get to that, would you prefer me to read them for you, or
Sure.
is that easier? Okay.
If that
So
works
the
for
first
today
one
too,
is,
I think that sounds fine.
okay. Will the permanent program allow restaurants to build structures on the sidewalk? I think you spoke about that.
I guess it depends on what's meant by structure. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it can't interfere with the street amenity zone, which is what we have on the curb line, which is usually where tree pits are, where the fire hydrants are, bike racks, that sort of thing. But so that's what I'm thinking of when I'm thinking of structures, but go ahead.
There will not be enclosed structures allowed on the sidewalk in the permanent program. As part of the text amendment, we will actually be sunsetting the enclosed cafe program that existed on sidewalks prior to COVID. The existing enclosed cafes that were licensed prior to March 2020 will be grandfathered in, but we don't
Mhm.
expect to allow new structures in the future program. So really what will be allowed are unenclosed cafes, which are readily removable tables, chairs, fencing, and umbrella, all that could be taken back into the restaurant at night if needed.
This is Gib, if I might, that was my question. So today, the guidelines for the open restaurant program do allow restaurants to build a structure on the sidewalk that has a roof, kind of similar to what they would do in the parking lane. It can't be attached to the building, but they do allow them to build a structure with a roof on it. And I see that in our neighborhood, we do have some restaurants that have done that. Will those not be allowed in the permanent program?
They will not.
Okay.
That's correct.
I think the emergency program was really to give as much flexibility to restaurants while there's a ban in indoor dining. But the thought of the permanent program is that, it's a post-COVID world, hopefully, and there are no restrictions on indoor dining, so there isn't as much of a need for seasonal outdoor dining. The sidewalk cafes will match more sort of what existed in the unenclosed cafes that were allowed in the pre-COVID program at Department of Consumer Workforce Protection, formerly known as DCA.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gib. So there is a concern about restaurants being motivated to build permanent structures to qualify for year-round hardship. But with that concern, does that, I guess what I want to ask is, that hardship waiver is for 2022, right? That's not for people right now. Because you said earlier that, or restaurants, that you would help with a clear design where they can, they have moving parts and it's not difficult to put, break down their restaurant structure and put it away for the winter. So, how much of a concern is that?
Right. So the structures are still allowed in the winter as part of the current program, the temporary program
Mhm.
through 2022, like you were saying. So it wouldn't kick in until late 2023 when that concern would come up.
Right.
I don't know if Ben has more details on the hardship idea going forward. I don't think it's fully fleshed out yet, but the intention is definitely not in any way to incentivize a high use of those.
Structures and waivers. Okay, next question about the community boards being involved. We will be involved in the review of open restaurants. I think you mentioned that.
Right. So
Applications.
and just to clarify, so like Ben was saying, that the community board involvement in sidewalk cafes is charter mandated, and we're
Mhm.
not looking to change that in terms of roadway dining. It is a new program and a new process, so that would work differently. So we're not envisioning a formal role for community boards in that process, though we are envisioning contact and complaints and input and that sort of thing.
Okay, so, well, from my understanding, can you just clarify that? So if you're only, okay, so what about if I'm sorry, the restaurants are going to be outdoors for the most part, what part will we have to be involved in the process?
So that would be the sidewalk cafe part of it, but not the roadway program.
Roadway. Okay, thank you for that.
But
Okay,
I do think as
next,
part of the
yeah.
liquor license application, the community board will be able to ask about, do they intend to serve alcohol outdoors and what their planned hours are for outdoor dining separately as they apply for their liquor application.
Okay, thank you. What is the timeline on responding to complaints on bad actors?
So I don't have a specific timeline on that. We're enforcing it now, but we're building out the permanent program with more enforcement. So I
Mhm.
imagine the complaint response time will change. Just from my anecdotal evidence, just from dealing with issues on the Brooklyn side, I think we've been pretty good about complaints with bad actors. If not, feel free to reach out to our office or make complaints in 311 or forward them through the community board to us. We've gotten some of those, and then we send our inspectors out and we issue the violations. Most of the time, it's really seems to be unintentional violations with stuff like signage and that sort of thing. And restaurants have been pretty quick to fix it. But I don't have a specific timeline on it. complaint responses just yet.
Okay, let me just ask you. So it seems like there's either decision made or you're leaning towards this 4-year time frame for a license. Can you explain why instead of the 2? What was the reasoning behind that?
I don't have details on that specifically. All I know is that that's the current plan, that there's still would be an annual review period. So there would be that opportunity to look at it on an annual basis, as well as individual complaints, but I'm not sure if Ben or Amy, if you have more info
Sure.
on that design.
We're hoping to improve it. It's sort of a twofold way of improving the process. So previously it was a 2-year license that the restaurant would pay for, and the license was good for that 2-year period, and then they would have to renew. Now what we're hoping is that they get a little more time, and so that it's a 4-year license that they will get. However, DOT will reserve a right for annual review to make sure that they're not changing the outdoor structure. So whatever was approved will be reviewed every year. And I think that's part, because it's seasonal. If the roadway cafe goes away in the winter and comes back out, they'll have an annual review to make sure that they're building it the same as it was previously. But the license, like the fee structure, which we don't have decided on yet, now that will be a 4-year license rather than a 2-year license. So it's a little helpful for the restaurants.
So in part of that annual review, would it be factored in the 311s and whatever issues that have been attached to the business? Would that be part of, whether they're misbehaving or not?
I
Would that be
certainly think,
factored in?
yeah, I think we have a great opportunity to do that, to kind of identify people that have a lot of complaints and are bad actors with their outdoor dining, and that could be factored into annual review.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question. What will be the enforcement mechanisms, and if DOT are given primary, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that is, primacy to oversee this use of the roadway and sidewalks, and what is the timeline on responding to correction?
So right now it's we go out and issue violations with instructions to change, to change the setup to be in compliance, and then if there's not compliance, we have the next step is fines, and then the next step is removal. And I think that process would stay in effect in the permit program. I'm not sure if Ben has anything to add to that as well.
Nope. Yep, that covers it.
Okay. What is the ratio of space for parked cars versus outdoor seating? Has that been determined?
It's an interesting question.
I think, we could, as part of the permanent program, estimate the amount of parking spots that are removed to facilitate outdoor dining. And I'm sure that's something that we'll take under consideration. Not any restaurant is allowed to have a roadway cafe. They can't have it in a bus stop. They can't have it in a bike lane. So there are many cases where, or a hydrant, like there are many cases where a restaurant just won't be able to do the roadway cafe if it's like hurting any particular city operations. But DOT will be making an effort to look at metered parking spots that would be potentially lost, but I don't think we have that exact number of ratio of parking to open restaurants. I think the best we can do is, once we have plans for roadway cafes and sort of the size and look at it with the geography of the street, that particular street block, we could look at what the parking loss is.
So there's a potentiality for streets that have restaurant upon restaurant upon restaurant, that we could have a string of the roadway structures and not have parking at all. Is is that accurate? That's a possibility.
There will be some requirements on distance between roadway cafes and certain things that the city's contemplating about loss of visibility, that we may have to limit the amount of restaurants that can have a roadway cafe on a single street. So we're sort of looking at examples of that where we might have to come up with a solution for that. But to answer your question, you know, if there were restaurants, you know, on a busy street, I'm thinking Franklin Avenue, as long as they're not taking up sort of the bus stops and other hydrants, they would be able to take a number of spaces on that street.
Consecutively. Okay. Will 1 to 6 family houses receive a tax reduction due to the change in their environment? Is that something you might know?
I could get back to you on specific. I think I need a little more. I don't think that we would change the taxes of a building based on outdoor dining.
Okay. Will you verify that some kind of way? Just look into it. Is that something you would be open to do?
Yeah, we can follow back
Great.
up with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Okay, if there are existing tree pits, will the Department of Parks also see their authority to DOT when the trees and their tree pits are affected by the creation of the enclosure and or ability for persons to navigate the sidewalk safely?
So tree pits tend to be located in the amenity zone. There will not be allowed to have a sidewalk cafe around those street trees. So the sidewalk cafe and the text amendment before the board right now shouldn't have a negative effect on the street trees. For roadway cafes that are built adjacent, we don't expect really enclosed buildings on the roadway and permanent program for the roadway cafes, so they wouldn't, hopefully those also shouldn't really be coming in conflict with the street trees. The street trees will not be ceded to DOT. That will still be in the Parks Administration.
Are tree pits the same as the bioswales?
Who's that? Hello?
I'm sorry, this is Sharon. Are tree pits the same as the bioswales?
So we've worked with the Department of Environmental Protection in sort of the first draft of the siting criteria and physical design guidelines, and we will be making sure that outdoor dining does not affect the operations of the rain gardens.
Okay, I'm just going to ask everyone if you have a question, and it's not your question that we're speaking on. If you could just raise your hand, that would be appreciated. Also, so you said something in terms of bus stops. So what if there is a restaurant, Ben or Dash, that is parked, they have their restaurant and there's a bus stop there? Is there going to be any accommodation or considered to move the bus stop?
No.
Okay, because there's a reason why I asked, and so that's not something that's going to happen, moving bus stops further up the street.
Not as part of this
Okay.
program.
Okay,
No.
just want to make sure. Okay.
I that should be clear, both as the way the city is envisioning the permanent open restaurants program, and particularly how this sidewalk cafe text amendment before the board tonight, neither of these really are allowing any restaurant or every restaurant, I should say, to have outdoor dining. There'll be clear path rules, citing criteria, distances from things like bus stops that would, there will be restaurants that won't be able to participate in the permanent open restaurant program.
Madam President,
Yes, who's speaking? I'm sorry. Desmond?
this is Desmond
Mr.
Atkins.
Atkins.
Yes.
Yes, please.
I would like to pose this to Dash, Amy, and the other gentlemen, because I'm the person Ben, who made the request about there's one particular intersection within our community board that for decades has basically been like Chinatown, in that nothing is enforced there. I happen to be the block association president for 3 of those blocks, 2 on the avenue and 1 in a residential block. There's a restaurant that is using the city zoning that previously had a restaurant there, but it was strictly carry out. This restaurant in the past year has set up tenting and seating on the sidewalk, tenting and seating that includes a bus stop, cooked and then basically stores their trash in the tree pit, includes a fire hydrant, and has live music Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, at least 2 of those 3 days, and has no permit. Also does not have a carting permit. The police don't respond because they're overwhelmed with crime. And so you're asking, and so we've already had another restaurant, which is an upper scale restaurant directly across the street from there, which caused major sanitation problems and caused a huge increase in our vermin population. And when I say huge, I mean huge, gentlemen. The only way we could stop them, after appealing to every city agency that I've named and some that I didn't, was to go to the Business Integrity Commission and have them force their Carter to change their nasty habits. You guys are very good at doing things to increase the tax levy, and you make sure that we pay our water and property taxes. But you really don't have any affection, and DOT and DCP does not have any affection for singular residential property owners. And that's why I'm pointing all these things out in particular. There are other people who have pointed out things, the fact that you are basically coming down as a fiat and mandating that you will do these things, and you're not considering the lifestyle or life of the purchasings of people who have been living here for 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and the way that you're changing the neighborhood. This is grossly unfair, and this should be referended, and it should be done on a very particular basis. There are other people who have written things. I've asked questions because I wanted to see your presentation outside of the presentation that was the PDF, the PowerPoint presentation. But basically, everything that you're saying leans to you are basically mandating and basically throwing away all citizens' rights. And there's already been enough done on that level. I'm grossly against this change in the way that you guys are coming in here and attempting or basically railroading us into doing this. So I want to be on the record speaking to you so that you will know that there are people who feel like me, and there are other block association leaders, community leaders who feel the same way. So I'm going to stop now. Thank you, Madam President, for allowing me that much time.
You're welcome. Ms. Collins, as I said before, are you calling in? Or you have your screen, Ms. Collins?
I'm not calling in, but I've had my hand up for some time.
Okay, so please go ahead. Thank you.
I have a few questions. First of all, I'd like to just put a stamp on what Desmond said. I don't hear anybody coming in asking us if we want this or not. This is what it's going to be. And I do have some concerns also, because and I had concerns about enforcement because it doesn't seem like in the past or present that a lot of sanitation or logistical problems are being corrected or being enforced right now. So if we put this on a larger scale, it's easy to say, well, we're going to enforce it and these are the rules, but the actual enforcing of some of these things like sanitation, the rodent problem that could occur. It's nice to say, well, we're going to find somebody, but we can see how that's working out right now with the city. I know they don't have as many workers, or they choose which neighborhoods that they're going to monitor and not monitor. Um, there are, as I travel through the city, I see plenty of sheds. I'm going to call them sheds because that's what they look like, that are not used in front of restaurants or abandoned restaurants that have been closed. So at this point, nobody seems to be enforcing that piece of going around to notice that. So I don't know how we're supposed to buy the pill that this is going to be so clean, it's clean running operation once it becomes permanent. And I also have another question about, I think I heard you say that fully enclosed enclosures are not allowed. Did I hear that correctly?
Correct.
Okay, so what
Sidewalk
constitutes
cafe
a
program.
fully enclosed um, sidewalk or street um, a cafe? Because I've seen them totally enclosed, which I don't understand if we're supposed to be, um, creating an area with good ventilation. Um, then why are these structures totally closed with plastic or even with wood? So what is, and they're standing and they're doing business. So I'm seeing a lot of contradictions here. So I don't know. If you could maybe answer that.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Collins.
Thank you.
I would say, to answer that, the permanent program, that sort of the vision of the permanent program, the text amendment presented to you before this is a program we're hoping to roll out in 2023. It is not the emergency program that's happening now. Part of the text amendment will be allowing these restaurants to that have sprouted up to continue, but that they will have to follow these rules that we've laid out. So, and DOT is in the process of hiring additional inspectors to kind of speed up and their ability to respond to those restaurants that you're talking about that are having problems. So it is going to be we want to take the feedback from the community right now, both on how they think the sidewalk cafe text amendment will affect them, as well as the rollout of the roadway program. We have sort of emails set up. We're doing these meetings to sort of take that feedback and inform how to improve the permanent program.
And
Thank you.
just in
And
terms of
enclosures will not be part, to get back to what you asked, the enclosures will not be part of the permanent program.
Thank you. Next is Fior Ortiz. Yes, Fior Ortiz.
Thank you, Chair Weatherspoon.
Thank you.
My question is, DOT will accept board recommendations and input for street seating. Will DOT seek recommendation input from LPC when establishments in historic districts seek permits? Since zoning resolution, Article 1, Chapter 4 will be deleted in its entirety. Thank you.
One second before you answer that. Ms. Collins, can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ben and Dash.
I don't know if I heard the question exactly. If she doesn't mind repeating.
I can repeat it, not a problem.
Yeah.
My question is, DOT will accept board recommendations and input for street seating. Will DOT seek recommendations, input from LPC, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, when establishments in historic districts seek permits, since zoning resolution Article 1, Chapter 4 will be deleted in its entirety?
So Article 1, Chapter 4 that's being deleted really only affects sidewalk cafes and where they are allowed to be located. We're essentially removing zoning from preventing a restaurant from having an outdoor dining and focusing instead on physical siting criteria. So the text amendment before the board is really just related to the geographic prohibitions of sidewalk cafes. As far as roadway cafes and sort of those types of structures in landmark districts, again, we don't expect sort of enclosed roadway cafes as part of the permanent program. I would also add that we're working with the Landmarks Preservation Commission on the design guidelines of the roadway program, and I think they will continue to be part of that process, as well as the public will be part of that process, sort of once we get to that step. Dash, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add to that.
Not to that one, no. Thanks.
Thank you. Our sidewalk and road cafes cited and are located where spaces are in close proximity to bus routes and bus transportation.
No, so the same rules would apply in that you can't have them in a bus stop, and you can't have them. They can be in close proximity to bus routes, but they can't be in bus stops themselves.
Or bus
Right.
lanes.
Or in
Bus
bus lanes,
lanes.
correct.
If there's a dedicated bus lane sort of in the curb lane as the city's rolled out, those would be in conflict and there wouldn't be a roadway cafe allowed there.
Yeah, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about Nostrand Avenue,
Mhm.
and you have that bike lane, so there won't be any roadway cafes on that side of the street. Okay, so you're not removing a bus lane. Okay, thank you
No.
for that.
Right. And just to say because I know it came up again before and someone mentioned it in the emailed questions as well. We do realize that, those requirements do have some limitations for restaurants that happen to be adjacent to bus stops and bus lanes, and we hope that they can participate in the sidewalk cafe portion of the program if they meet those seating requirements. And we also have the Open Streets program, which I know many of you are aware of, particularly Gib, which does provide opportunities for situations such as Vanderbilt Avenue and that sort of thing, and depending on different time schedules. So there are opportunities for restaurants to go beyond the seating that is required of them in that existing program.
Okay. The car situation is a real concern. What's going to happen, if we have those consecutive restaurants, just in general, just with this program, what is going to happen with cars? No parking. There's no parking left. So what happens? Who is the one who can create that balance? What thought is being measured with regard to that?
I will say, and I don't know if Ben will have anything to add to this. It's definitely, we do recognize that the curb has a lot of competing uses, whether it's driving, whether it's parking, whether it's buses, this dining program, bike lanes, other uses, loading zones, and that sort of thing. So it is sometimes tough to strike that balance. We know that just proportionally that this program has used very little of that roadway space when you look at it on the whole. And we do hope that the success of it and the high use of it is seen as a good trade-off to repurposing some of that parking.
I would say, one of the goals of the rollout of the vision of the permanent outdoor dining program is that we're moving the licenses for sidewalk and roadways which didn't exist before COVID, but the sidewalk cafe program to DOT is that DOT is really the master of the streets in New York City, and is more aware of what is going on, what are the competing uses, what are the other programs that are needing curb lane space, rather than just having it at what was the Department of Consumer Affairs, now is the Department of Consumer Workforce Protection, which was a licensing agency that just made sure all the paperwork was there and that all the rules were followed so that they could approve the license. So I think, having this program at DOT will allow for a more holistic view of the curb and the needs of the transportation network.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that balance, because I think about the city bike. I'm sorry, Miss Collins, can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. I'm thinking about city bikes, and there's a rollout now that's coming. So you have them on the sidewalk, and you have them in the roadway. So I can't even. What's going to happen with the city bikes? Because someone's going to have that question. A few people are going to have that question, not just cars, but for those apparatuses. What happens?
And are you asking if we're going to
Are you going to
remove city
remove
bike
some?
locations?
Yeah.
I
mean, because cars can't seem to park, and it looks like the roadway restaurants rule right now. So what happens to the city bikes?
I don't know offhand on any specific large-scale plans to relocate city bike docks.
Yeah.
So I know, I'm trying to think in terms of, we continuously look at operations of City Bike in case there's, problems, and we can look at moving them, but I don't think there is an overall plan to consider moving them now.
Okay.
I'd like to chime in on that one, if I may, Ms. Witherspoon.
Go ahead, Ms. Collins.
If I could just make a point. I have to agree with you, because it seems like the only people that are going to be going to these restaurants are people who can walk, ride a bicycle, or take a bus or a train. So you're leaving out the people that may need to drive, go to the restaurant. And it seems to me that kind of cuts back on the business. If the purpose of having these outdoor dining places, restaurants, then you would want to have as many people coming to the business as possible to boost the economy. But it seems with your plan, you're certainly icing out a segment of the population and reducing profit margins for these restaurants. So I don't understand that line of thinking, or not thinking, actually, not considering to actually have restrictions so that there can be parking. Because if I heard you correctly earlier, I didn't think you said that there was any thought around cars per se, but just the fact that not every restaurant will qualify for the program, so that would create maybe spaces, but not really keeping cars in your plan.
So is that a comment? I mean,
kind of a comment.
Let's just leave it as a comment. No disrespect, but I just really want to be able to move this along. And there are a couple of other people who want to ask a question, Ms. Collins. So they understand the sentiment. I mentioned it, and you reinforced it. So we're just going to move on, okay?
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wedderburn, please.
Not a question, but a comment. And I'm going to say this along the lines of what Ms. Collins had to say. We have to think back to when we're creating economic opportunities per se, but what happens over the long run. And I'm specifically talking about the creation of the downtown Brooklyn Mall, which limited access of motor vehicles along that strip. And it became dead space during particular times of the year. And the inability for many people to access those businesses contributed to their demise. For example, the recently reopened Gage and Tallner. So just something that we have to balance the access to automobiles for those of us that do not have an incredible amount of mobility, plus parking vis-a-vis the sidewalk cafes and the parking for the city bikes.
Thank you, Ms. Wedderburn. Jonathan Marable. Do you still have a question, Mr. Marable?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just wondering about adjacent businesses. I've seen in some instances that sometimes patrons will, kind of like if you have two restaurants next to each other, both of them have an outdoor area. Sometimes restaurants will kind of have an informal agreement with each other to kind of, you know, let one space service overflow for the other. And you'll also see situations where like a business is closed, and so they just let the other business use the space in front of their business as extra like space. Will this sort of thing be allowed, or will it just strictly be in front of their storefront, like their frontage only?
Right. So that's something that has been allowed in the temporary
Yep.
program. Oh. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So sorry, I was saying that's something that has been allowed in the temporary emergency program to allow restaurants to use adjacent spaces at adjacent properties, but that will not be allowed in the permanent program now.
Okay.
Thank you. So we have a couple more questions. So in this order, Celine Rosado, Tamika Gibbs, and Robert Callahan, in that order. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I just have not even a question, just a comment.
Wait. Hold on, Tamika. Hold on. Celine first. Selena
Oh,
Rosado.
okay.
Celine
Sorry.
Rosado. Yeah, and then you. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Forgive some of my background noise. I don't really have a quiet place to be. Let me see if I can go in my office. So my question is for DOT. How will DOT change its practices moving forward with this program prior to different programs by creating guidance and structured outlines for specific violations, specific fines that would be attached to specific violations, so that there is not an arbitrary kind of situation where you get all these new inspectors that really don't know or are not experienced, and therefore it's just random violations, random fines, random notices. One thing is okay here, but it's not okay there. Minority businesses aren't being targeted. Disproportionate communities aren't being targeted by 311 calls. Just so that it's very fine, it's very black and white. And the guidance and the guidelines that are given to inspectors are also given to restaurant owners, so it doesn't feel like a haha gotcha moment. Or owners, we're already, as an owner, I'm one of the co-owners of Sweet Brooklyn Bar on Notion between Atlantic and Pacific. You don't experience that same anxiety as we used to have in the past with inspectors and inspections. And really just not knowing one second to the next. Okay, well, if a rag is on the bar, is that $100 fine? Is that $1,000 fine? Is that a fine at all? Everything is so arbitrary. It's so secretive. We don't know what's going on. So I'm just wondering if, when you do implement this program in its finality, so I guess the 2023 version, will there be finite guidelines that get given out to both the inspectors and the restaurant owners to avoid the bad actors on both ends, in the community side and on the business owner side, from creating a negative space for all of us in an unfair way?
So the short answer is yes. So what we're looking to have is very clear and simple guidelines for everything and an understandable process of inspection and reporting and having an opportunity to fix, then having another inspection, and then having consequences after that. That would include the fines and possible removal. So I think some of that unfortunate confusion and back and forth has happened because of what I was saying before of it being a temporary emergency program and some of that guidance changing. So whether it be related to winter or weather or storms or changes in terms of CDC guidance and that sort of thing, or unforeseen situations that the rules, original rules didn't reflect, so we had to update that. And I know that has been confusing for some and not fun to deal with. I know when I've spoken to individual restaurants on those issues, I haven't met anyone who, is really trying to get away with anything or do anything bad. It's every restaurant is trying to, make the most of the space and to get patrons in and is trying to obey the rules and sometimes has trouble with those rules, like you're saying. So we definitely want that process to be simpler, more straightforward, and that's part of why we have this longer period to institute that permanent program. So we have that kind of input and have everything released in time for well in advance of those rules taking place. And then having the permanent enforcement structure at DOT so that the inspectors are trained on those specific rules, like you're saying. So it's clear to both sides. I'm not sure if Ben has anything to add to that as well.
No,
Yeah.
I think Dash, you summed it up really well. And Celine, I thank you for that comment. I think that's really important. The city rolled out an emergency program for a pandemic we did not expect. It was reactionary. We've done a lot to learn through this process on what would constitute a good permanent program. And so your feedback's really helpful, and we recognize it's, clear communication and guidance is really important, and we're going to be working towards that.
Thank you so much. Next up, Tamika Gibbs.
I just have a quick reminder, or maybe a comment that maybe DOT and Department of City Planning may want to consider for the local residents, long-term residents, and new residents of the community to possibly think about permits for the area. Because over the past 10 years, the residents of the area has been squeezed out and is getting tighter and tighter. That's all.
Thank you. Next, Robert Callahan.
This is probably more of a comment than a question. It may end up turning into a question. I say this as someone who has been enthusiastically supportive of individual restaurants that are doing outdoor dining and seating. But my overall impression is that this is a pretty extraordinary privatization of public right-of-way, and that shouldn't be taken lightly. That we are ceding permanently space that people use for many uses to a specific business. And while that may be a worthy cause and that business may be a stalwart of the community, the effect is that it's a single use. And I quite frankly think that the city should take that into account and make sure that the public is adequately compensated for a private business taking over public right of way, be it streets or sidewalks. Feel free to respond, but that's my comment. Thanks.
Any comments? Okay.
Just to respond to that, we do think a lot about that. Sidewalk cafes and this text amendment, it is something that's been part of the city streetscape for a long time. So we're looking sort of at improving it by removing sort of a zoning geographic restriction and focusing more on having the appropriate sidewalk width and sighting criteria. So it will still allow, the public to travel through, while also allow for restaurants to do some outdoor dining where they can serve the public and kind of enliven the streetscape, I think is something that we've been thinking a lot about that we think is really important. As far as other uses and other businesses, we do, have an open storefronts program. It's not extremely well used or as publicized, but that is something that the city has provided during COVID. And we're looking at ways to improve that, as well as an open streets program where we're sort of working to, shut down streets to traffic and open it up for other uses. So we do see this as sort of a one tool in a number of tools in the toolkit to kind of work to improve the streetscape conditions for the public.
Thank you. Next up, Ethel Tyus.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're
I'm
welcome.
repeating a question that I thought would show up earlier. Maybe I missed the answer. I see the materials say there will be some concern to provide fire department with proper turning radius for its equipment, firefighting equipment. I don't have the page number here, but I want to know what other fire prevention or fire suppression requirements will be part of this process.
So currently, and as part of the permanent program as well, any location has to comply with the fire department's open flame rules and any other applicable fire code.
Thank you. Patrick, and then Jeanette, please.
Hello, everyone. Sorry for that. I just wanted to ask, we are a restaurant on the Open Streets program, and during this entire time, we have been, jumping and dodging all sorts of different barriers or lack thereof during this time during COVID. And I really appreciate what I believe her name is Jeanette and also Celine said out there, that we have been all on the restaurant side. I think there are a lot of restaurants on the call right now trying to learn about the very new protocols and do what's right to comply for safety and for the neighborhood. Some of the things that we have been up against is even just with the barriers in from phase 1 to phase 2, changing midweek of them needing to be 18 inches thick, 30 to 38 inches high, filled with sandbags, and then to turn right around and need them to be 100% movable. The design guidelines that we need right now are that very modular, what are we allowed to invest in moving forward as we prepare for the permanency of this program. It's very difficult for these restaurants to plan to make it, 100% immovable for protection, but then also modular in a way that can be removed for snow removal. And it causes us a lot of anxiety and a lot of stagnation in how we can comply to the current DOT items, because there are some things that we would like to improve on, but we would like to improve on them for the permanency of this program. And I don't know if there's any more information about how the DOT plans for these very solid structures to protect our public, but also for them to be completely removable. Where are we storing the sand? Where are we storing is that going to be city helped or subsidized, or is that going to be completely on the restaurants?
Dash or Ben?
So thank you for bringing that up, Patrick. That's one of the issues. Barriers is exactly what I was thinking of, and when I was talking about it in the presentation. of, the difficulty of rule changes and adjusting to those. And that and the other design considerations are definitely ones that we're working on in the permanent program to be very clear, and also to have examples of them to share with you and every other restaurant owner and manager. I don't have specifics right now on how it would work with the seasonality and the removal and storage and that sort of thing. Beyond, I know we're working on that hardship waiver situation, other considerations around that. But just to reiterate, that requirement with the installation and removal based on the seasonality would not kick in until 2023. So we do have some time on that. Hope that answers the question.
Sorry about that. I guess my follow-up to that is there are a lot of questions on here that are about enforcement and is enforcement happening? And I just would like to say out there that we have gotten different citations and actions against our restaurants. So I would at least like to say, in the good spirit of being a good community member, that those reminders of things that we thought we were doing right but weren't necessarily doing to a T. We do appreciate the DOT coming through and helping us along that way. But I do have to say that it is a little bit of a juggling match when a lot of the citations come in during the day when we're actually not open. And maybe some of the community members that are seeing restaurant structures during the day not being used, some of them are actually being used in the evening times. And in addition, it just is very difficult with work done and sidewalks being renovated to completely invest in overcoming a citation when you know that in a week or two or a month with no scheduling, the whole sidewalk will be redone. And in addition, in September or October, new design guidelines will come through that the very, things that you did to secure your barriers are now, in conflict with a new design guideline. So I just want to kind of put out there and echo what Celine said. The restaurants, I believe a lot of us are on here and we want to do what's right and we want to be good actors in this community. And a little bit of patience and a little bit of kindness can go a long way. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate everything that each and every one of you on the community board and with the DOT and the SLA and everyone is doing here. It really has saved not only jobs, but our way of life in Brooklyn. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick. Jeanette, did you have a comment that you wanted to make or a question? Okay, so I'm going to take that as a no. Question, is there a time frame before DOT removes moribund cafes? Because there are a few shells in our district.
So it is 30 days of inactivity. That's a little bit easier if the restaurant has closed permanently. So that is something that is complaint driven. We have removed structures because of abandonment, or we've either had restaurants do it or we have done it ourselves when we've needed to.
The guidance on the temporary program that's in effect right now is that if a restaurant applies for an outdoor dining and say they start to build it, but they don't finish it, if it's not active in 30 days, then the city will respond by warning them that they will have to take it down since they are not using it. And that if they do not take it down, that the city has the right to take it down. I think if abandoned structures, like known abandoned structures, is a concern of this community and you are aware of these, like please let Dash and I know and we can follow up quicker.
Thank you. I just have one last question that I had to make. I think there are a couple of more, and we do have to wrap this up. But what about locations that have the space that they have in their restaurant? Maybe the capacity is 10 people. That's intentional. That's what the capacity is. Will they be allowed to now open up on sidewalks and roadways with more than those 10 that have been designated as the capacity? Will they be able to expand when that was not the intended setup or design?
Well, the intention of the outdoor dining program is to increase capacity for restaurants a little bit. I would say if it's a 10-seat cafe, it's likely in a building that has very small frontage. So they're limited, again, both for their sidewalk or roadway cafe, to the frontage of their restaurant. So they're likely to have a pretty small sidewalk cafe, roadway cafe, only a couple seats. And for a roadway cafe program in the future that's not free, I don't imagine it would make a lot of financial sense for them to invest sort of in the structure and pay a fee for just 2 or 4 seats. So I think we don't really contemplate restaurants really being able to seat only 10 people indoors, but then seat 30 people outdoors. Does that sort of
Okay,
help?
it
Madam
does,
Chair?
because excuse me, there's actually a establishment that is set up that way where they're very small and they're using 2 corners
Mhm.
for their space. And you can pass by at any given time and count on one hand how many patrons they have. And I find that abusive.
They are allowed to use both sides under the temporary program. So I think if you were to share that restaurant with us, it's something we could look into and think about. But they may not be against the temporary programs rules. I have to look at this example
Okay.
and think more about it.
Okay. We'll contact you with that offline. We're going to wrap this up. Desmond Atkins has a question, because I just want to remind everyone that this is a presentation. This is not something we're voting on tonight. So we are appreciative of the time that has been taken to answer all our questions. Any more questions after Desmond Atkins speaks, please write them and send them to the district office. Okay? Mr. Atkins, thank you.
Thank you for allowing me this last moment to speak. I believe you were addressing the very question that I was going to bring up. There is a place that sells baked goods that has a corner property. They are the owner, the entrepreneur is already a known bad actor within the community.
Okay, I'm sorry. I hate to cut across you. If you're going to reinforce the thing that I just said,
Well, no, I had another point.
oh, okay. Oh, okay, because we're going to send him that information for
Okay,
that particular place. Yeah.
thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to thank Ethel Tias for bringing up a point about safety, but under the guidance of our mayor, his Safe Streets programs, he has narrowed roadways and increased the size of parking, which is also given you guys guidelines as far as how you're going to set up the roadway enclosures for restaurants. But I believe the question that she was hinting at or getting to was that in certain blocks, is there a safe turning radius for safety vehicles, particularly fire trucks or even ladder company trucks? And who is watching that closely to enforce that, along with the fact that NYPD cannot enforce all double parking requirements, and that at the time of an emergency, seconds can mean lives and property. And having these enclosures on the street or on corners impedes safe operation?
So the guidance on the turning radius right now, and Dash, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 8 feet for typical streets. For narrow streets that are 30 feet or less, or 25 feet or less, that it will have to be 15 feet from the crosswalk. So 8 feet from the crosswalk on typical streets, on narrow streets, 15 feet.
Right, and just to reiterate beyond that, the structures in the temporary roadway program and the permanent roadway program are only in locations that could have previously been used by parked cars. So anywhere that these have been, or somewhere where a parked car was or could have been, and there's no more obstruction because of that. So it's, any issue that would have been there before would have been there with the parked car. But just beyond that, we're working with the fire department, as Ben said, to ensure that and other considerations with sightlines and visibility are ensured.
I just want to stress the fact that an illegally parked car can make those guidelines be thrown out the window. And that's my only point, because thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Atkins, for teasing out that question from Ms. Tyus. Amy, Dash, Lee, Jesse, Ben, and any other members of your team that I might have missed, thank you so much for coming out and listening to us and answering our questions as best as you can. We will be in touch. There are other questions that are coming down the pike. And I know there are a couple of things that you're going to follow up for us as you've promised. So with that, if all minds are clear, I want to wish everybody a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursa. Thank you for having us. I'm just curious when the community board plans to vote on the text amendment.
Well, Ms. George, would you like to, are we doing it in this board meeting coming up?
Yes, we are.
Okay, yes, we are, okay. Yes, so that would be our community board meeting, September 9th.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, you
Thank
too, and everyone
you.
else.
Thank you very much for your time.
Bye-bye. Sure. Good night.